I felt you in my legs before I ever met you. And when I lay beside you, for the first time I told you, I feel you in my heart.
We are back, kicking off May with our Lead Sister Month, starting with Lead Sister number 1, Sara Quin of Tegan and Sara. We discuss hating gear, wanting smaller gear, faster gear, easier to carry gear, and finally reside in Sara's memories of storytelling with Fisher Price and her sister, Tegan.
I feel somewhat prepared to just actually tell you that I don't like any of my gear. So I did try to come up with some with an alternative to just like a piece of gear, because I was like, at first I was like, maybe I'm not really qualified to do this podcast because I do not really like gear. In fact, I spend a lot of my life with my hands thrown above my head, yelling about how we have too much stuff and we need to get rid of it. And it's broken. And I can't believe it hasn't been made easier, lighter, faster, quicker, simpler, whatever. And so it's so funny to me that that I would be on a podcast like this, because I actually feel like I offer the alternative to what you're trying to, like the people that you're trying to highlight.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right. Well, this should definitely make it even more fun. So I guess what we're going to have to do then is we're going to have to roll you back in time and maybe take you back to the younger years, pre where you are now and your relationship to gear.
Do you know, it's really funny because like all joking aside, like the truth is that I mean, when I really started thinking about it, like, has there ever been a piece of gear that I did like? I think for me, what I love, what is it like an imperative for me if I'm going to write music and be a songwriter and in a band is the computer. You know, when I got out of high school, one of the first investments that Tegan and I made was in purchasing an Apple desktop with a Mac tower. It was super expensive, and we bought like a Pro Tools rack, and we set everything up, and we started recording our demos. And that was I was not fearful. I did not hate the computer. I didn't always totally understand Pro Tools, and whenever I would sort of try to become more, fluent in Pro Tools language, I would hit a sort of ceiling. But the computer itself, like the idea that I could sit down and write music in real time and listen back to it, has been my method of songwriting since I was a teenager. So I do love the computer. Does that count? Does that count as a piece of gear?
Does. Yeah, of course it does.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So we even just had Brendan Canty on here from Fugazi, and he actually didn't talk about his drums. He actually spoke about a 4-track. So right. I think that everything has a place in this. And I think especially in music, there are so many aspects and so many pieces of gear that play in time with everything we do in our careers. And also some people have very interesting stories from their childhood, where, their fathers have built their guitars. And I know originally you and Tegan started out, mostly playing guitars, using pretty heavy gauge strings, etc. Did you never have like a favorite guitar? It was just all like at all. It was just all straight. You were happy, like when you came into it, that the digital world, it was all born into Pro Tools.
Yeah, I mean, I guess before computers, when we were just in high school, fooling around trying to figure it all out. I mean, in a weird way, almost immediately, so I had an acoustic guitar. And I wrote a song, and the first thing I did after I wrote the song was record the song on my little stereo that I had in my room. And so, I mean, in a weird way, I was using a sort of more, a more rudimentary, simple version of what I use now with the computer. I mean, I was, there was something really intuitive where I wanted to I wanted to get a recording of what I was doing so that I could then listen to it and decide what I liked or what I didn't like. And,
Sure.
and I did that, almost immediately at 15. And I mean, I probably was doing it since I was a little kid. We were in possession of one of those Fisher Price, stereo little tape recorders, and it had a microphone, and you could stick a cassette in it and you could record yourself. I mean, Tegan and I, we like wore our Fisher Price tape recorder out. I mean, we wanted to record everything we did. So I think in some weird way,
I think that's a great gear story, because just to be completely transparent with you, at the end of all of this podcast, at the end of season 1, I'm going to disclose what my favorite piece of gear is. And mine is my little guitar that was given to me by my grandfather. And it was amazing. Just a little Roy Rogers and Tigger with like rope around the edges. And the thing was awful. And of course, I loved rock and roll music. So I would go and just show it off to the kids in the neighborhood. And I would stand on a thing and, sing to the kids in the neighborhood, and I'd charge them $0.25. And, I remember a couple of kids, even their parents, I think, came to my mother and said, do you know your daughter's charging people to listen to her, like stand up there and howl with this thing? So yeah, that's as deep as my gear story is.
That's so funny.
So I'm really liking the way this is heading. So let's talk a little bit more about this Fisher Price recording instrument and what you guys would do when you went out with it.
Well, I mean, it's the weird thing is that Tegan and I talk about this a lot. Like, what is a memory, and what is our memory, and what is like a photograph memory. Sure. So like, I have seen photographs of us with this tape recorder, but I mean, we were young. We were like 3 years old or 4 years old. So I don't necessarily have a strong memory of it myself, but I have the photographs, and I have the cassette tapes of the recordings that we made. And, most of the recordings that we've heard, it's usually my parents interviewing us, asking us questions. And then at some point it always sort of devolves into, Tegan and I fighting over who's holding it, who's talking, who's holding the microphone, who turning the machine off and on.
Do you feel like that's carried through the years?
Well, I mean, we're not as destructive as we once were, but I do think that there is a competitive nature to our storytelling. Like, I think that because we are present in so many of each other's memories, and then also, we're just together all the time now. I mean, it can be difficult to hear Tegan telling a story that I was also there for, and I'll think, that's not how it happened, or that's not the version I would tell, or that's not the detail I remember, whatever it is. So, I mean, I think as little kids, because we were together all the time, there was definitely that frustration of like, I want to tell the story. I want to do it. And, sure. And the tape recorder, captured a lot of that. And then, I think we really, even early in those cassette tapes, there was a lot of I'm sure my parents were just trying to keep us entertained. So there was a lot of like, tell us the story of the Three Bears. And then we just go on and on for like 30 minutes telling a story that is not the, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It is a completely made up story. And it's so funny to me because I think even at 3 years old, we were really encouraged to be storytellers. And we have these sort of like, even though the story isn't very good, there is something that's sort of captivating about listening to us sort of trade off. Like, and it's
Sure.
not a story that we probably have told. It's not a version of the story that we've told before. So you can sort of feel how one of us sort of picks up a thread. Oh yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. So the medium bear did this thing. And it's like, we're kind of lying. Like, we're sort of like, the old story about the medium bear. And like, we're just kind of like riffing off of each other, which I think, that sort of embellishing and sort of, I don't know, like almost like we're like, like we've always been sort of, tennis players, with each other. Like
Sure.
if Tegan hits the ball to the left, I'll go to the left. If she hits it to the right, I'll go to the right. Like we sort of follow each other's lead. And I can hear that even on our Fisher-Price recordings.
Sure. Well, I think good relationships are all about the push and pull for sure, without a doubt. And, also a reason for having you and Tegan on is, the month that we're putting you up on Dear Gear is our lead sister month. So you'll be appearing alongside Kim and Kelly Deal as well, who will be coming on the next episode after you guys. So I love what you're saying here. And, I hope I can extract some of this out of Tegan and we can, find out what her tale is behind the Fisher-Price recorder. And if she remembers the bear story as well.
I'm sure she will. I'm sure if either she'll come up with it.
Can you guys
on
get
her
together and like prepare or something? No, I'm just joking.
No, it's funny because it's not like we were children of this generation where there's just, outrageous amounts of video and audio and photographs and whatever. I mean, in some strange way, being a child of the 80s and the early 90s, you end up with, a limited number of archival kind of like things, but it's like that, but in a weird way, they're so important because like, I don't have 50 cassette tapes. I have two, I have two tapes that made it through and I can, I remember everything about those, about, what was captured on those tapes because there were only two of them. I mean,
Sure.
that was all there was. So, but yeah, I think in some weird way, we showed really early on as little kids, we sort of showed this kind of acting, performing, recording, editing, storytelling thing, and it sort of, maybe there was a bit of a gap in the years where we weren't making music. Tegan and I used to do this really weird thing. After the Fisher-Price recorder went away, we got each of our own little individual, like little tiny stereo systems, like you could kind of pick them up and carry them. You could put batteries in them if you didn't want to have a cord, that sort of thing. But we used to record
like a boombox.
Yeah, like a boombox, but like a small one.
Okay.
And we each had one. It had like a single cassette tape deck in it, and we would bring them out to the living room and we would set them up. And when we would watch TV, we would record audio. Like we would record the television show that we were watching, and then we would go to bed at night and we would both listen to the recordings of the TV shows that we were watching. And I don't know why. It was very strange. It was almost like they were like radio shows. I mean, they were totally different when you couldn't see the actual screen, what you would sort of pick up. Just listening to these voices was so interesting. And I think about it now, there was like this set like number of programs that we would watch each week, and we would listen every night to the same, say we were, like watching Full House. Okay. We record Full House, and then for the next 6 days before the next episode airs, we'll listen to the Full House episode on the cassette tape, like every single night. And, which sort of isn't necessarily like music related, but we took it so seriously. Like where we determined was the best place to put the tape recorder. And then we didn't like to have commercials. So you would have to be really rigorous about like making sure you were paying attention. So you would pause the cassette tape during the commercials and then restart it when the program started again. I mean, we really took it on as like a full-time job.
I love this. I love it. It definitely, it speaks to, I think both of these stories that you've told speak to a lot of the interaction that is apparent probably to a lot of your fans, Yeah.
And I think, there was like, a lot of times people have these origin stories about music that involves singing and performing at a young age, and someone saying, wow, there's, what an amazing voice. And that's how it all started. Like everyone has these kind of like traditional kind of stories. And Tegan and I didn't, we didn't, we weren't natural singers. We took piano lessons and that sort of thing, but like no one thought we were like, there was no one taking my mom aside after Tuesday night piano lesson being like, they really are fantastic, real gifts, like there was no one. I think we were probably average, very average in terms of like we sang or how we performed. But when I look back, now as an adult at, where our strengths are or the things that we did since we were little kids, the thing that comes up over and over again was this sort of ability to produce ourselves and to think about audio in a sort of strategic, technical way. And I would never have called myself, a producer or a technical person when we started out. I just felt like, I wanted control over how we sounded. And while I didn't totally understand how to make myself sound a certain way, I didn't want to leave it in the hands of someone else. And so, buying that computer when we were 19 years old and buying Pro Tools, even if I only had like 3% understanding of what I was, the programs that I was using or the technology that I was using, I liked what I produced better than when I went into the studio with someone who had made it their career. I always felt like I didn't like that as much as when I just like pushed a bunch of buttons and moved a bunch of faders and went like, that's what it's supposed to sound like.
Sure. Right. And, I think that's what adds to your uniqueness too. Cause when you guys do layering in the studio, you're very thoughtful about it. And, not everybody has that gift. And, so there's something to be said about having an ear like that around your sound. And I feel very similar about it. I've recorded and, and very loosely I use the term produce. But the same thing, I just have more of an interest of being involved in the process the most I can be, as well. So, I think, it's, especially for women, that's probably a unique thing to hear, when we were younger kids. And that's probably why the piano teachers weren't clamoring, because we were probably doing things that were like a little bit more outside of the box. But like, hey, the world is a full group of flavors here. So luckily everybody's starting to get it a little bit now, I hope, with all the veil being peeled back and, especially in this country.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. And I think, that the analysis for me, like looking back as a kid, sometimes I feel really bad because I think that, oh my God, what if at this stage someone had really said, oh, you really have a unique voice, or you really do have a unique style. Like, let's nurture that. And
Sure.
Sometimes I can become sort of agitated thinking about all the early missteps, like, signing our first, we did a demo deal out of high school. It was really short term, and it was essentially just for a way for this record label to decide if they were even interested in doing like a long form deal and to make a record. So we went into the studio and we recorded a few songs, and based on those songs, they decided not to do a record deal with us. And I remember sort of feeling like at the time, I was like, didn't care. I was actually feeling really anxious at the thought of being sort of like locked into something contractually with this big record company. And
Sure.
But when I think about the process involved in like, okay, here's these teenagers who are, who are prolific songwriters and who are recording these great demos, and they've garnered a lot of attention really early on, sort of just, sort of without knowing anything. Like, we just sort of were like, I don't know, maybe we should play some shows. And then we do X, Y, and Z. And then all of a sudden we sort of have this fan base. Like, we already were showing signs of something that I know now in the music industry is like, it's not everyone has that. Like, whatever that sort of like magic thing or that extra little, whatever magic, we had it. And I think to myself, that should have been protected. And instead they took that and they said, now we're going to put you into the studio with, Jim, and he's going to, record your demo, and he's going to make suggestions about what you should do. And, it was like they took all the magic out of what we were doing at the time. And then when they heard the result, they were sort of like, oh, this doesn't sound great, fuck off. And
Right.
I think to myself, like, if what would have been probably far more cool and organic and special would have been to let us just do what we wanted to do and give us that time to figure it out. And I think, people will argue with me on this, but like, I think men are often afforded that. It's like, oh, cool, you're doing this weird, cool thing. Oh my God, put it under glass, protect it. They're a fucking genius, whereas
Right,
like with
sure.
us, it was like, oh, I'm so attracted to these writers and they're so cool and weird and unique, but we should definitely straighten this out and put them in the studio with a 40-year-old balding guy from, whatever, like
Sure.
from some shitty studio and see if he can really help them figure it out. And it was like, why? But, at our age, we had no idea. We had no idea at that point anyways, how to say no. And thankfully they thought we sounded like shit, so they didn't sign us. And then we ended up, kind of striking out on our own and doing it in a way that allowed us to sort of, really take advantage of what was weird and idiosyncratic about our process.
I've enjoyed every story that's come so far from everybody that's been on the show, because it's ended up being so off of gear. And that's exactly, what Kate wanted,
Yeah.
It was more kind of an idea about how much things have changed. And when Corin Tucker came on, I think in the end, a lot of it ended up, we started talking about like, how things have changed so much for us as women through the years.
Yeah.
And what a difference there is now in regards to not only like relationships to gear or sound or anything. I feel like you're correct in the way that everything started out in our conversation in regards to, it took me forever to get on board with Pro Tools. I spent a lot of time recording analog, and the same thing. I always had a lot of old guys, trying to, tell me how to do it. For sure. Some things were helpful, some things not so helpful. But quite often I think we're given advice that we don't even really ask for,
Yeah. And also too, it's like a lot of times, I think about this a lot with, some of the men who came into my life really early on. So many of them they had the best of intentions, they had,
sure.
and in a weird way,
sure.
they were usually passing along information and advice that probably had been passed along to them in the same way from another guy. Like they were, sure. I don't know that they were necessarily even treating us, like, oh, here's these girls, we have to teach them and show them how to do things. I think probably they would do the same thing to a guy. I just think that a lot of times the way that men sort of deal with each other is really different. And I often felt like, well, I better be nice and I better accept this advice and I better do it their way or they're going to be mad or whatever it is. Whereas now I'm just like, no, thank you. I don't want your advice. Like, I've got it, but sure. Back then, I was like a 17, 18, 19-year-old kid when I first started going into studios. And I felt like if I was going to get any kind of approval, it was like I had to get through these gatekeepers first. And I think what, for me anyways, like computers and technology have allowed me to sort of like circumvent a lot of those gatekeepers. Like I knew very early on I wasn't going to be like the most prolific guitar player. And I just like did not have time to spend 10,000 hours practicing. Like that was not going to be my gift. But sure. I knew that if I could I knew that very early on with computers and with technology, I could manipulate my voice and I could take a lot of different tracks and make it sound really interesting and unique. And I knew that I had a gift for earworms and, so in a weird way, I didn't have to wait for these gatekeepers to say to me, like, yes, you are a guitar god and now you understand how to, run a tape machine. So you are allowed to go to the next level. Like I just was like, fuck your levels. I'm out,
Thank you so very it
was a pleasure and best of luck with the podcast. It's a great idea and I can't wait to listen.
Fantastic. All right. You take care.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Please head over to teganandsara.com to pick up any of their amazing albums. This episode is dedicated to the loving memory of Stacy Fuller, April 1st, 1975 through May 5th, 2018. Rest in peace, lead sister. We love you always. Until next time, this is Dear Gear. Take care of one another.
I swear I tried to leave you at least 100 times a day. I swear I tried to tell you 1,000 times a different way. I need out on my own, I don't wanna live this way. I need out on my own, I don't wanna live this way.